بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين.
كتاب بدء الوحي إلى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. باب كيف كان بدء الوحي إلى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. عن عمر بن الخطاب رضي الله عنه قال: سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول: إنما الأعمال بالنيات وإنما لكل امرئ ما نوى، فمن كانت هجرته إلى دنيا يصيبها أو امرأة ينكحها فهجرته إلى ما هاجر إليه.
Today we're starting, inshallah, reading from this book that summarized Sahih Al-Bukhari. And unlike what we're doing, I understand we start from the beginning of the book, inshallah. And the chapters in Sahih Al-Bukhari, the way that Imam Bukhari organized the book, the chapters are very comprehensive. And they're not limited to one particular subject or one particular theme. They're very broad. Every category that you could imagine about hadith or attributed to the Prophet ﷺ. The first chapter in this book is Kitab Badr al-Wahy, Kitab Badr al-Wahy, or the chapter of how the divine inspiration began to the Prophet ﷺ. And this was abbreviated out of the summarization, but the chapter title in Sahih Al-Bukhari, and something very good about Sahih Al-Bukhari is that Imam Bukhari, rahimahullah, he has, in the book, he has kitabs. Kitab is like a chapter, or like a big topic, like Kitab al-Salah, or Kitab al-Wudu, or Kitab al-Imam. Then he has babs, and a bab is like a subchapter, and a bab may often be one or two ahadith. But in the title of that bab, there's Imam al-Bukhari will often draw very deep inferences from the hadith, and you'll often take very fine lessons from a hadith that shows you how deep the understanding of Imam Bukhari was, rahimahullah. Another thing that Imam Bukhari will do is he'll often make those babs, the titles he will make them ayahs from the Quran. So the hadith that he's mentioning, it's like a tafsir of the ayah. And that's part of what he did here. Part of the chapter title was the ayah from Surah An-Nisa, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to the Prophet ﷺ, إِنَّا أَوْحَيْنَا إِلَيْكَ كَمَا أَوْحَيْنَا إِلَى نُوحٍ وَالنَّبِيِّينَ مِنْ بَعْدِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to the Prophet ﷺ, we inspired you just as we inspired Nuh and the prophets after. So the theme of this chapter is the hadith that expound on that ayah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, we inspired you, we gave you revelations as we did to Nuh and the prophets after him. How did that happen? What do we know about how that happened? The hadith in this chapter explains some of that. The first hadith he mentioned in this chapter is a hadith we're probably all very familiar with the hadith of intentions. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Commentators on Sahih Al-Bukhari have struggled to connect that particular hadith to the topic of the chapter. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, there's probably no direct relationship. It's as if Imam Bukhari wanted to start the book Sahih Bukhari with that hadith to be a reminder for himself and a reminder for the reader that he collecting and compiling this collection of hadith or reading, studying it, and the value of that action depends on the intention of the person doing it. There are also some other subtle things that have to do with that hadith. In the chain of that hadith, which we're not going to study, the chain of narration of that hadith about the intentions, that chain revolves around a scholar from Mecca, Sufyan ibn Uyayna. And then the next hadith revolves around a scholar from Medina, Imam Malik, rahimahullah. So some scholars have said maybe in a subtle way, Imam Al-Bukhari was indicating that the revelation began in Mecca and ended in Medina. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. The reason that he put this hadith in the beginning of the book was not because it had anything directly to do with how the Prophet ﷺ received the divine inspiration. It's to be a reminder. And some scholars from the generation of Imam Bukhari and before said, one scholar who was a contemporary of Imam Bukhari, Abdurrahman ibn Mahdi, said if I was going to write a book, I would put this hadith, in the beginning of every chapter in the book. There are a number of statements from scholars such as Imam Ahmad, Imam Shafi'i, and Abu Dawud and others that this hadith is a third of all knowledge, or a quarter of Islam, or similar statements, because the meanings and the implications of this hadith are very profound, very broad. The hadith, Umar ibn Khattab radiyallahu anhu said, and this was summarized out of this narration, but the narrator from Umar, Alqamah ibn Waqqas, said that I heard Umar ibn Khattab saying this on the minbar when he was giving khutbah. Umar ibn Khattab radiyallahu anhu said, سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول إنما الأعمال بالنيات. They translate that here as the reward of deeds depends upon the intentions. There is a lot of debate among the scholars about exactly how to translate or how to interpret that sentence. They interpret here as that the words of the Prophet are إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Actions are by intentions. Actions are by intentions. The Prophet didn't say anything about reward, at least not explicitly. Some scholars say that that's implicit in the meaning of what the Prophet said is the reward of actions is based on the intentions, or the acceptability of actions is based on the intentions, or the result of actions is based on the intentions. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, but perhaps the best way to translate the meaning of the phrase that the Prophet used would be to say that actions are only through intentions, meaning that an intention is an integral part of every action, meaning that you can't have an action without an intention. Everything you do, for me to be moving my hand like this, for me to be talking, I have to have an intention for doing that. So that what the Prophet ﷺ, in the first sentence in the hadith, he's making a statement of fact that all actions arise from intentions. Actions don't just happen by themselves. Every action any person does, there's an intention behind it. Don't just think that the action is what you see on the outside. There's always an intention there, and if there weren't an intention, there could be no action. That first part of the sentence, that's a statement of fact. It's a statement of fact. The next part of the hadith is an admonition or a lesson based on that fact. The Prophet ﷺ said that all actions have intentions. All actions are based on intentions. There's always an intention there. وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَا نَوَى. And each person in the end will only get what they intend. The Prophet ﷺ said every action has to have an intention. There's an intention for every action. And that intention, that is the basis on which that action will be judged. And the person will only get what he intended by that action. Meaning that a person, two people, could do the same physical action, but the result will differ based on what they intend. And this, the word here, niyyah, intention, the word is not in the Quran at all. But the meaning of this hadith is throughout the Quran, in many places in the Quran. For example, if you take salah, and salah throughout the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elevates the status of salah, and salah is one of the greatest action, the greatest deed after Imam. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Ma'un said, "Awaylu lil musallin." And that Surah Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, "Woe to the people who make salah." Why, even though it's a great action on the outside, why is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala threatening them or warning them? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ سَاهُونَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ يُرَاءُونَ. People, they make salah, that the outward action is there, but what's inside is deficient. Something inside is wrong. They're not doing it for the right reason. They are careless about their salah. الَّذِينَ, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, الَّذِينَ هُمْ يُرَاءُونَ. They do it not for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they want people to see them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said about the hypocrites in Surah An-Nisa, وَإِذَا قَامُوا إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ قَامُوا كُسَالَى يُرَاءُونَ النَّاسِ. So they get up for salah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, when they get up for salah, getting up for salah is a good thing. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that the intention is wrong. They قَامُوا كُسَالَى, and they're lazy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said they get up and they're lazy. They have no real desire to make salah. يُرَاءُونَ النَّاسِ. They're just getting up to show off to people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said about, for example, sadaqah in Surah Al-Tawbah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَمِنَ الْأَعْرَابِ مَنْ يَتَّخِذُ مَا يُنْفِقُ مَغْرَمًا وَيَتَرَبَّصُ بِكُمُ الدَّوَائِرَ. وَمِنَ الْأَعْرَابِ مَنْ يَتَّخِذُ مَا يُنْفِقُ مَغْرَمًا وَيَتَرَبَّصُ بِكُمُ الدَّوَائِرَ. There are some of the Bedouins, the desert Arabs, who consider the things that they spend, they consider it like a tax. They consider it to be a burden. And they are waiting for fortune to turn against you. So what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, they're spending, but they consider, and it's part of their intention, how they think about what they're doing. They consider it to be a burden. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, they are waiting for bad things to happen to you or fortune to turn against you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, bad fortune will turn against them. Wallahu alimun hakim. And Allah is all-knowing, all-wise. And then in the next ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَمِنَ الْأَعْرَابِ مَنْ يَتَّخِذُ مَا يُنْفِقُ مَغْرَمًا وَمِنَ الْأَعْرَابِ مَنْ يَتَّخِذُ مَا يُنْفِقُ وَمِنَ الْأَعْرَابِ مَنْ يُؤْمِنُ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ وَيَتَّخِذُ مَا يُنْفِقُ قُرُبَاتٍ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ وَصَلَوَاتِ الرَّسُولِ. There are some of the Bedouins who believe in Allah in the last day, and they consider what they spend to be a way to bring them closer to Allah and to get the blessings of the Prophet. So they were spending as well, but they considered it in a different way. They had a different intention. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said about them, أَلَا إِنَّهَا قُرْبَةٌ لَهُمْ أَلَا إِنَّهَا قُرْبَةٌ لَهُمْ. Certainly it will be, it will bring them closer to Him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself said that about them. It will bring them closer to Him. Well, سَيُدْخِلُهُمُ اللَّهُ فِي رَحْمَتِهِ. And Allah will cause them to enter, allow them to enter into His mercy. Also in Surah At-Tawbah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned a group of the hypocrites who they built a masjid, but they built it which is a very good thing to do. But they built it for wrong reasons. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَالَّذِينَ اتَّخَذُوا مَسْجِدًا ضِرَارًا وَكُفْرًا وتفريقا بين المؤمنين وإرصادا لمن حارب الله ورسوله من قبل. Those who built a masjid, it wasn't done out of faith or to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It was done to like compete with other people, and it was done out of kufr and to split the ranks of the believers, and it was وإرصادا لمن حارب الله ورسوله. They were doing that. They said they were doing that to receive a man named Abu Amr al-Rahib, who was an enemy of the Muslims. They built the masjid to have him come as a guest there. No. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said about that masjid, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in those ayahs mentioned two masjids, the masjid of Quba or the masjid of the Prophet depending on the tafsir, and that masjid that the hypocrites built. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, أَفَمَنْ أَسَّسَ بُنْيَانَهُ عَلَى تَقْوَى مِنَ اللَّهِ وَرِضْوَانٌ خَيْرٌ أَمَّنْ أَسَّسَ بُنْيَانَهُ عَلَى شَفَا جُرُفٍ هَارٍ فَانْهَارَ بِهِ فِي نَارِ جَهَنَّمَ. And they're both, people are building a masjid. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, which one is better? The one who built his masjid upon taqwa, and that's the intention, and the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or someone who built his building on the end of the edge of a cliff, of a precipice, and it fell into the fire of hell. And in both of those people are building a masjid. Now in Surah Al-Hajj, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said about the sacrifices we do in Hajj. لَنْ يَنَالَ اللَّهَ لُحُومُهَا وَلَا دِمَاؤُهَا وَلَكِنْ يَنَالُهُ التَّقْوَى مِنْكُمْ. It's the meat and the blood from these sacrifices, that's not what reaches him. وَلَكِنْ يَنَالُهُ التَّقْوَى مِنْكُمْ. What reaches him is the taqwa from you. So it's not just the outward action. It's the fear and the awe and the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that's in your hearts, the taqwa that's in your hearts. And even things that don't have to do with things that don't have to do with the ibadah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in Surah Al-Baqarah about the people who are in charge of orphans. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْيَتَامَى. They ask you about the orphans. And what they were specifically asking, to understand from the ayah, is that a person would be in charge of an orphan, and that orphan had property that he inherited from his family. And that person taking care of him may just have enough for himself and his dependents. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala threatened many times in the Quran those who steal from orphans or do injustice to the orphans. So they were worried about, it's hard for me to support him just with my own income. Can I take from what he has to support him? Or can I even take like a fee from what he has? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, قُلْ إِصْلَاحٌ لَهُمْ خَيْرٌ. Doing what's good for them is best. إِصْلَاحٌ لَهُمْ خَيْرٌ وَإِن تُخَالِطُوهُمْ فَإِخْوَانُكُمْ. And if you mix your property and if you mix your wealth together, they're your brothers. But the point I want to give you is that after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ الْمُفْسِدَ مِنَ الْمُصْلِحِ. وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ الْمُفْسِدَ مِنَ الْمُصْلِحِ. Allah knows the one who has good intentions, who is trying to do good things, from the one who is trying to do bad things. So you're allowed, if you need to take from the wealth of the orphan that's under your care. And you may be able to fool people because on the outside, your action you may not look like you're taking anything unjustly. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, well, Allah knows who intends to do good, who has the orphan's best interest at heart, and the one who is trying to, pad his own wallet. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said also in Surah Al-Baqarah about sadaqah. Maybe the ayahs at the end of Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned a person who spends his wealth to show off is like a rock, like a smooth rock that has dirt on it, and then the rain comes and then washes all the dirt away, and it's left with just barren rock. And the person who spends money seeking the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is like a garden on a mountain. And then when the rain falls on it, instead of washing the dirt off, it gives its fruit, it multiplies its fruit. So that again has to do with the intention. And both people gave sadaqah, but the person was doing it so people could see how generous he was. It went to waste. And the person who did it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that action was multiplied by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in the Quran we learned that a good intention can take something small and turn it into something big. For an example, in Surah Al-Tawbah, most of Surah Al-Tawbah was revealed about which battle? Is that? Al-Usra. Al-Usra, which is a nickname for which battle? No, not
No.
after
Tabuk, I think.
Tabuk. Battle of Tabuk. It was called the Ghazwat al-Usra because it happened at a time when there was like a drought, and it was in the middle of a hot summer, and it was a very difficult time for the people of Medina, and it was a big hardship for them to put together that army to go out to Tabuk to face off with the Roman army. And the Prophet ﷺ requested anyone who is able to come. Everyone should come. Everyone should, give or help in any way that they can. During that battle, there were some poor people, some poor believers, who only had very small things to give. So they came and they contributed them to the Prophet ﷺ. Some of the hypocrites, when they saw what they were giving these things that looked insignificant. So they mocked them and said, Allah doesn't need the sadaqah. This person, why is he wasting his time? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from above 7 heavens, said about those people who were mocking them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala came to their defense, to the defense of those believers who were giving those little things that maybe from a material standpoint, it wouldn't have done a lot to help the army. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, look how much Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala valued what they gave because of their intentions. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in their defense, الَّذِينَ يَلْمِزُونَ الْمُطَوِّعِينَ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ فِي الصَّدَقَاتِ وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَجِدُونَ إِلَّا جُهْدَهُمْ فَيَسْخَرُونَ مِنْهُمْ. Those who make fun of the generous believers and the charity they're giving, and they make fun of those who only can find a little bit to give. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said about the hypocrites, فَيَسْخَرُونَ مِنْهُمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, سَخِرَ اللَّهُ مِنْهُمْ. سَخِرَ اللَّهُ مِنْهُمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mocks them. And that shows the greatness of those people who are giving that little bit. They may not have, from a material standpoint, may not have helped the army a lot, but because of their intentions, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala values it greatly. Now, in the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, and this again is reinforcing something that is, and find that throughout the Quran. A person will only get what he did. Also in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that someone could even do something wrong, but because they didn't have a bad intention, they're not responsible for it, or they're not punished for it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَيْسَ عَلَيْكُمْ جُنَاحٌ فِيمَا أَخْطَأْتُمْ بِهِ وَلَكِنْ مَا تَعَمَّدَتْ قُلُوبُكُمْ. There's nothing, you're not sinful for what you do by mistake, only for what you do, your hearts intend to do. So again, that goes back to the intention. That is the meaning of this hadith, that you only get what you intend. You didn't intend to do something wrong, so you don't get any of the punishment or the sin for doing something wrong. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also said about oaths, someone who says wallahi, and they're not thinking about what they say, they're not intending to actually swear to do something. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, لا يؤاخذكم الله باللغو في أيمانكم. Allah doesn't hold you responsible for the oaths that you say without thinking. ولكن يؤاخذكم بما كسبت قلوبكم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala holds you responsible for what your hearts earn and what you intend to do. Allah, the Prophet ﷺ said, a person will only get what he intends. And then the Prophet ﷺ gave an example. The Prophet ﷺ said, the example was a hijrah. The Prophet ﷺ, this is not the hadith was narrated several variant wordings, and Imam Bukhari in his book, he will take one hadith and split it and narrate it in a number of different chapters, because the hadith may be relevant to a number of different chapters. Unlike Muslim, rahimahullah, Muslim, he takes one hadith and he lists all of the variant wordings, all of the different narrations of that hadith, he lists them all in one place, and in the most obvious place that you would think that. Also, another difference is this. I know, but another difference between Bukhari and Muslim is that Muslim just has the kitab, the big chapters. He doesn't have the bab. If you have a copy of Sahih Muslim and it has those subtitles or the sub-chapters, that is from, who knows who's that from? A scholar who wrote the commentary on Sahih Muslim. He also compiled Riyadh al-Salihin and the famous 40 hadith. No. Those subtitles or sub-chapters are from Imam al-Nawawi. That's why Imam al-Nawawi was Shafi'i. A lot of those subtitles clearly indicate that the person writing them is from the Shafi'i madhab. We don't know that Imam Muslim was a follower of the Shafi'i madhab. Which you think it was strange if you're just looking at the book and you think that Imam Muslim is writing these chapter titles. No, but that's a side note. Now, in another wording of this hadith, not the one that we're reading right here, the Prophet ﷺ said, فَمَنْ كَانَتْ هِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ فَهِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. The Prophet ﷺ said, whoever's hijrah, whoever's immigration is for Allah and His Messenger, someone who left their home seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and in order to be able to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and come to the aid of the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to the believers. Whoever left their homes with that intention, then their hijrah is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger. And the reward is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then the Prophet ﷺ said, وَمَنْ كَانَتْ هِجْرَتُهُ لِدُنْيَا يُصِيبُهَا أَوْ امْرَأَةٍ يَنْكِحُهَا. And whoever's hijrah, their immigration, is for some worldly gain or to marry a woman. There are some narrations that there was a particular person who made hijrah to marry a woman. It appears that that's not why the Prophet ﷺ said that was a different incident that happened after the time of the Prophet ﷺ. We do know from some narrations in the Sirah that here the Prophet ﷺ is talking about a man, but we know also from some narrations in the Sirah, especially that have to do with Surah Al-Mumtahana, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that surah said, when believing women come to you, then test them. There are many narrations that say that some of the women from Quraysh, if they got in a fight with their husband, they would say, I'm going to join Muhammad, in order to make him angry. So they would, the believers in Medina would test them when they came. And one of the ways that they would test them is by asking them, why are you coming here? You have to swear that you're not coming to spite your husband or because you're angry at your husband, or you're not coming for any material gain. You're only coming out of love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger. The Prophet ﷺ said, whoever made the hijrah for the sake of some material gain, or for a woman to marry, then his hijrah is for whatever he immigrated for. And we notice the Prophet ﷺ, in the first part there, he said, whoever's hijrah is for Allah and His Messenger, his hijrah is for Allah and His Messenger. And he repeated, for Allah and His Messenger. Here he said, whoever's hijrah is for material gains or for a woman, it's for whatever he immigrated for. It's as if those things, are not even important enough to mention again. Now, this hadith, as we said, that hadith has a lot of implications, and it has a lot of relevance in fiqh. Imam Shafi'i said that there are dozens of chapters in fiqh that are relevant, or that this hadith is relevant to. It's important to understand that the words of the Prophet ﷺ here, when he said a person will only get what he intends, there are two types of intentions that this hadith covers. Two types of intentions. There is the intention, who am I doing this for, or why am I doing this? That's one type. And who am I doing it for? Why am I doing it? The other type is, what am I doing? What am I doing? And that first type of intention, who am I doing it for? What's the reason behind me doing this? What am I seeking? The other type of intention, what am I doing? Am I making ghusl, or am I taking a shower? Am I praying Salat al-Dhuhr, or am I praying Salat al-Asr? Am I praying Salat al-Fajr, or am I praying Tahiyyat al-Masjid? Which one of those two categories was the Prophet ﷺ specifically talking about? From the example that he gave. The example that the Prophet ﷺ gave, which category would that fall? Why? The first part. That's what the words of the Prophet apply to both types. But the Prophet ﷺ, the example he gave indicates that he was stressing that first part. And this first type of intention, why am I doing this? Who am I doing it for? That's the most difficult kind of intention. And some scholars have said, I've never had to struggle with anything like my intention. It keeps changing. And there's one narration that Imam Ahmad, rahimahullah, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, he read this hadith with one of his students, and he looked at him and said, this is like a noose, like a knack. And this is like a rope around my neck. Because this is hard. This requires struggle. And this requires a person always to be conscious of this, always to worry about this. And that's what the Prophet ﷺ was focusing on. The second type of intention, it does apply, and the words of the Prophet ﷺ do apply to that. But how difficult is that? Is it difficult or not? To decide whether I'm praying Dhuhr or praying Asr. Is that difficult? No. It's not difficult. It's obvious. Yeah. To make up my mind whether I'm making ghusl or just taking a shower, doesn't require any work. To make up, to intend whether am I praying 2 rak'ahs for Fajr or 2 rak'ahs for Tahiyyat al-Masjid. That's not any work. And unfortunately, and especially in the books of fiqh, that second type of intention, the scholars go into so much detail about that second type of intention. And the Prophet ﷺ, his primary focus here was that first type of intention. And the Prophet ﷺ didn't go into all of these excruciating details that the fuqaha went into about when you pray Dhuhr, you have to summon an intention. The Prophet ﷺ never specified that other than these general words. And the Prophet ﷺ never taught us when we make wudu, and it's not anywhere in the Quran or anywhere in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, when you make wudu, first intend And the Prophet ﷺ said, he never said when you get up to make salah, or first make your intention. Because you can't do it without an intention. You have to have the intention. And if the Prophet ﷺ told us, theoretically, if the Prophet ﷺ told us, go do this, but don't intend, we wouldn't be able to do it.
Yeah.
It's impossible. You have to have an intention. And so this second type of intention, it is important to keep in mind. If you pray 2 rak'ahs, and if you come to the masjid in the time of Fajr and you pray 2 rak'ahs, and you intend that this is the sunnah before Fajr, you can't, that's what you get. A person only gets what they intend. So you can't say, oh, I prayed 2 rak'ahs now. They count for Fajr. No, a person only gets what they intend. Or you go to make a shower, and then you later on you say, oh, that should count as I'm going to make that count. You didn't intend that, so you don't get except anything but what you intend. And if you think you're praying Asr and it's time for Dhuhr, you don't get Dhuhr, and it doesn't count, and so on and so forth. That's not. Likewise, if you don't eat throughout the day because you couldn't find any food, you're not fasting. Or if it just maybe you're busy with something, it never crosses your mind that you want to eat, you never get hungry, you can't say that you're fasting because you didn't intend that withholding from food and drink to be an act of worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you don't get anything but what you intended. Now we'll stop here, inshallah, and continue with this next week. Again, this book, I know this is available